everybody, please put your hands together for the wonderful Elizabeth Freele.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, Rose, and all the team behind the scenes that we're not seeing at the moment. Thanks for having me back this year. I'm Liz, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a managing partner at Impact Advisory. It's an ESG think tank and consulting firm specializing in social performance in the mining industry. Now, seemingly aligned with what a lot of other folks are talking about today, I also wanted to chat about communities hosting critical minerals that the world needs to power the green transition. Because I, for one, am really struck by how little the world is talking about this particular group in all the just transition discourse. I'm going to try not to be too inflammatory. But I do love this industry, but there are some topics I'm pretty passionate about that I think we need to work on. So I hope you'll bear with me, and I just hope to stimulate some honest thought and honest conversation. So the first question that this conference is seeking to answer: what do we mean when we talk of the just transition? At the risk of sounding too great resignation millennial, I think that the narrow focus on work and labor that we most often hear about associated with this term falls way short. So I was glad to see Andy also allude to this. For me, a just transition means greening the economy in a way that is fair and that is inclusive for as many people as possible, for everyone concerned. And that includes mineral hosting communities. This means it has to include interventions that are securing sustainable livelihoods, not just jobs, to support local resilience across the globe. That's, the capacity for a community to persist, to adapt, to transform in the face of change. And there is big change coming. And finally, to uphold universal human rights, the dignity of all humans, as our economy makes this shift to more sustainable consumption and production patterns. So I felt like a good place to start with mining's contribution to these topics was with a kind of uncomfortable statement that there are very clear reasons for me why the folks at COP26 didn't care to bring us in the room, why we aren't welcomed, why we aren't trusted. And from where I sit, I think one of the most dangerous parts of the mining green transition discourse is that we still don't own that in many respects, we are deserving of that distrust. And so I wanted to pull up this recent study from the Responsible Mining Foundation or Index, I can't remember which. So the top 100% line here shows societal expectations of our industry. And the average company score against that, 20 to 30%. And there's no doubt this whole ESG tidal wave thing is pushing performance higher, it's pushing the bar higher. But what these data shows is that we are not committing to do enough to meet basic societal expectations in the first instance. We aren't acting enough on the commitments that we make. And when we do take action, it's not clear if it's even working. Providing a product that powers the green transition does not inherently make us contributors to sustainable development either. And short-term community philanthropy impacts are not the same as sustainable development. We too often confuse them. It's not that we can't, but we do have a poor track record. Our improvements are incremental in the grand scheme of things. Every mining project is different, but at a macro level, there's been some fair documentation now indicating that our industry's sustainable development impacts are minimal at best. So here's another view of that study data. Check out the average company score on the right side against the 17 SDGs. It's embarrassing. So on average, we aren't making a lasting positive impact to livelihoods and community resilience. We aren't meeting society's basic expectations on community and environmental responsibility. So when the IEA declares to the world, oh, over the next 30 years, we need more than 3 billion tons of metals and minerals, I, for one, can see why communities that are resource rich are not ecstatic. I'll go to my next slide. So as an industry, as we seek to develop these areas where these communities are, a really concerning thing we're now seeing is this rise in human rights related allegations coming out of those communities, especially in some of the more so-called new frontier areas of critical mineral extraction. So on the screen, there's a recent update of the Transition Mineral Tracker, for example. What's especially uncomfortable is the large proportion of all of these that come down to just a dozen of our biggest mining brands, most of which are out there talking about what an amazing job they're doing at ESG. It's disingenuous, and it's at the heart of, again, not being trusted or welcomed as an industry. So company community conflict continues to rise. Communities are starting to sound alarm bells. They're forging alliances globally to share strategies and stories to push back on mining's business as usual. Because what it looks like is our industry's model might be actively working against those just transition focused themes that I mentioned, livelihoods, resilience, and rights. So no wonder communities are concerned. This trajectory isn't a just transition. Social resistance, I think, will continue to escalate if we cannot authentically change our approach to these things as an industry. And that's something that the whole world can't afford. What scares me is that as an industry, we're increasingly playing this card of our product serves the greater good. We're powering the green transition for all of humanity. And that's true, but I fear that this narrative risks enabling the industry to start increasingly forcing projects on people to justify lasting negative impacts and to continue these unacceptably low contributions to sustainable development. Which brings me to guiding question number 2. What do we need to change to be socially acceptable? Because on our current path, local mining communities are mostly not set to win in this green transition. And that is foundational to us not being welcome at the table. It does not have to be this way. So the answers to this question are vast. I know I can't cover all my ideas here, but I'll focus on some that are purely social as my contribution. And one thing I know for sure is our approaches have to be people-centered. They need to be empathy-led, and they need to have a systems lens. So I had to think about it last night, and I believe a lot of actions can and should be rooted in these 3 principles, my little building there. First, do no harm. Lose the idea that we should expect a community to just accept a certain degree of negative community impact and just hoping that some community investment dollars will somehow balance it out. Because for most communities, it doesn't. We need to get better at acknowledging that sometimes there are mines that really should not be built, whose impact simply can't be justified. Second, respect rights. This means trying to balance power dynamics that are often inherent in the company community relationship, creating a safe space to listen and recognize that any community, as Andy alluded to too, has a right to self-determination, to informed consent, to what's being proposed in their own backyard. So that also means being less paternalistic and colonial in our approach. I heard that earlier as well. Someone else talked about colonialism in our approach with communities, and learning that community engagement isn't just informing people about your ideas or ticking a permitting checkbox. Listen to a range of voices. Align our strategic business decisions with local priorities. I also think related to that, we need to normalize doing a whole lot more social due diligence and social baselining way before we even think about project design, especially when it comes to impacts to ecosystem services that are core to those themes of community resilience and sustainable livelihoods. Third, equitable benefit distribution, because sharing is caring. There was this really inspiring Indigenous elder from the Tahltan Nation, Alan Adzerza, who was gracious enough last year to come on my podcast in the middle of the pandemic, and his voice still rings in my ear. He said, we have to move beyond trinkets and beads. And I just love that. Equitable benefit distribution doesn't mean a little bit of community philanthropy fund for host communities. A just transition means rectifying the inequality that so much resource development has fueled around the world, and not just for decades, for centuries. This is our legacy as an industry, and I think we forget that a lot. So I think we should be thinking about innovating our entire business model on this point. Things like proper profit sharing, things like equity-based community and Indigenous ownership, modular and small scale mining, inclusive approaches that explicitly are seeking to shift economic control to a community level and to democratize wealth. I had a few other thoughts I wanted to share, not fitting into these 3 buckets, but that I also think are very important as part of my answer to that question. We need to remember compliance is not enough, and nor is disclosure. I think we're really on this ESG reporting train. that's not the same as action. We also need to reset company short-term incentive structures. It's all nice to talk about these things in conferences, but if we don't change the way we incentivize folks all through our mining companies, nothing's going to change. We need just transition-based KPIs to inform our organizational structures and our incentive programs. Finally, I think most companies need way more comprehensive social management tools and proper social science training for their teams, at site, but also at a leadership level to properly understand sustainable community development and what are the sociological impacts of mining, of climate change, and of the green transition. There's a lot I know we can't control, but I know we can control how we choose to behave as individuals, as companies, as guests, and mineral hosting communities. Change is hard, but climate change is happening now. To all of us, to our families, to our communities. It's prompting a crucial global economic shift. Our future as a species hinges on our ability to get this right. We have a real opportunity as an industry fueling that transition. If we want to be welcome, if we want to be respected at the table, if we want to be effective in our contribution, we've got to learn to work together with each other, with our communities, with other industries, even with weak governance structures. There's broken states all over the world hosting mineral resources. We need to turn that SDG column of red blocks to green. We need to lift that average line on those community and environmental performance charts right up. And we have got to obliterate that high number of human rights allegations. I believe if we can shift that mindset to be rooted in respect for rights, to do no harm, to equitable benefit distribution, to supporting sustainable livelihoods and community resilience, all the way to some of the most remote corners of the world, we can accelerate critical mineral resource development that is just, that is equitable, and that can reposition mining communities with companies together as winners in the green transition. Those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours either now, after, or feel free to give me a shout. You can write to us by email or social media. And thank you for your time. And thanks again for the opportunity to speak today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. Round of applause from everybody here. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. And I think thank you also actually for showing us the emotion that I think we all certainly feel. I know that Ludovine's been messaging behind the scenes going, this is how I feel at the moment, is that frustration that is in there. So thank you so much for that, Liz. Catherine, I saw that you put your hand up briefly and then took it down again. I don't know if you want to come in on this discussion, because I know that a lot of what Liz has just shared, I suspect was certainly echoed with what you said a little bit earlier on. Do you want to come in on this discussion briefly now?
Yeah, I was looking for that sort of that icon emoji thing that puts banners up and that little firework thing. And so I clicked on that. I could only put my hand up. So that's what I was trying to do. Is I was sort of letting off some fireworks in celebration of what Liz said. So no, we speak the same language. So I haven't really got anything to add other than to say yeah.
That was not my intention to get emotional. I'm a little embarrassed.
But I think this is something here, Liz, where one of the questions that we asked to Catherine earlier on was, do you think we have to be kind of brave to work in this sector? What do you think, Liz?
Very much, because I think particularly working in anything sustainability, whether it's environmental or social, I feel like we often also end up feeling very alone, where we're kind of in the middle of two worlds. One, there's the mining industry. You're always the weirdo in the room. You're the tree hugger. You're the communist. Or you're the mining industry person to the rest of society. And so not only brave, but yeah, lonely. You're trying to find your courage alone a lot of the time, and trying to tread carefully between these two worlds, trying to be accepted by both, trying to have credibility with both. And it's really challenging.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Liz.